There is something almost embarrassing about how often water comes up in health conversations. It is so simple, so obvious, so unglamorous compared to the supplements, the protocols, the optimized routines that dominate the wellness space. Most people have heard "drink more water" so many times that it has lost all meaning, sliding past their attention the way a familiar background sound eventually stops registering at all. They know they should drink more, they intend to drink more, and then they go through most of the day on 2 glasses and a coffee and wonder why they feel the way they feel. But here is what almost nobody talks about when they talk about water. They talk about it as if it is simply a substance the body needs to avoid a problem, a minimum requirement, a threshold to clear. Drink enough and nothing bad happens. What they rarely explain is what actually happens inside the body when water intake genuinely increases, not just to the threshold of adequate, but to the level of genuinely well hydrated, consistently, for days in a row. Because the changes that unfold over 7 days of proper hydration are not subtle background adjustments. They are measurable, widespread, and in many cases, dramatic enough that people who experience them describe the week not as a health experiment, but as a revelation about how far below their potential they had been functioning. The reason the effects are so significant is rooted in a fundamental biological fact that most people intellectually accept but have never truly internalized. Your body is approximately 60% water by weight. But that number, impressive as it sounds, does not capture the real story. Every single chemical reaction in your body, and there are millions occurring every second, happens in a water-based environment. Every nutrient your cells absorb arrives dissolved in water. Every waste product your cells produce is removed through water. Every electrical signal your nervous system transmits depends on the precise concentration of ions dissolved in water. Every joint in your body is cushioned by fluid that is mostly water. Every organ is embedded in tissue that requires constant hydration to maintain its structure and function. Water is not one ingredient among many in the body's chemistry. It is the medium in which all of the chemistry occurs. When that medium is depleted, everything slows, thickens, becomes less efficient, and begins to generate the quiet cascade of symptoms that most people have come to accept as their normal. So let us go through it day by day. Let us follow what actually happens inside you when you go from chronically underhydrated, which is the default state for a significant majority of adults, to genuinely well hydrated over the course of a single week. To establish a starting point, it is worth understanding what mild chronic dehydration actually looks like inside the body, because it rarely looks like thirst. By the time the thirst mechanism activates strongly enough to feel urgent, the body is already meaningfully dehydrated. Thirst is a late signal, not an early one, and in many adults, particularly as they age, the thirst mechanism becomes progressively less sensitive, meaning the gap between the body's actual hydration need and the conscious awareness of that need widens over time. Most people living in mild chronic dehydration do not feel dramatically thirsty. They feel tired. They feel foggy. They feel like their digestion is slow. They feel like their skin is dull and their energy is unreliable, and their concentration frays faster than it should. They attribute these things to stress, to age, to diet, to sleep, to 100 other causes. Water is the last thing they consider. By the end of day 1 of genuinely increasing water intake, the first changes are already underway, and they begin in the blood. Blood is approximately 90% water, and its viscosity, how thick or thin it flows through the vessels, is directly affected by hydration level. In a chronically underhydrated person, blood is slightly thicker than it should be. The heart has to work harder to pump it. Circulation to peripheral tissues, including the skin, the extremities, and the smaller capillary beds throughout the body, is less efficient. Within hours of increased water intake, blood viscosity begins to decrease, circulation improves, the heart is doing slightly less work for the same output. Tissues that were receiving marginally inadequate blood flow begin receiving more. The kidneys respond almost immediately to increased water intake, and their response is informative. The kidneys are the body's primary fluid regulation and filtration organs, processing around 180 liters of fluid per day and fine-tuning the concentration of everything dissolved in the blood. When hydration is low, the kidneys conserve water aggressively, producing small amounts of dark, concentrated urine and keeping as much fluid in circulation as possible. This conservation mode is efficient in a survival context, but it comes with a cost. The kidneys are less effective at flushing waste products, excess minerals, and metabolic byproducts when they are in conservation mode. Substances that would normally be diluted and excreted linger in higher concentrations. Within the first day of increased water intake, urine output increases and begins to lighten in color, reflecting the kidney's transition out of conservation mode and into active filtration. This shift is not just cosmetic, it represents the kidneys doing their job more completely, clearing the bloodstream of compounds that had been accumulating at slightly higher levels than ideal. By day 2 of increased water intake, the effects on the digestive system begin to become noticeable. The digestive process depends on water at every stage. Saliva, which begins the breakdown of food in the mouth, is mostly water. Stomach acid, which is essential for protein digestion and pathogen defense, requires adequate hydration to be produced in proper volume. The enzymes that break down macronutrients in the small intestine operate in a water-based environment, and their efficiency depends on that environment being properly maintained. Intestinal motility, the rhythmic muscular contractions that move food and waste through the digestive tract, is significantly affected by hydration status. In a dehydrated gut, motility slows, the intestinal contents thicken, transit time increases. Constipation, bloating, and general digestive sluggishness are among the most common and most reliably improved symptoms of chronic dehydration. By day 2 of increased water intake, the gut is receiving more of the fluid it needs to operate efficiently. Transit time begins to improve. Bloating that had become a persistent baseline experience often begins to ease. This is not because water is somehow fixing a structural problem. It is because the gut was always capable of working properly and was simply being asked to do its job without adequate resources. Day 3 is often when people begin to notice something changing in their head, quite literally. Headaches are one of the most common and most consistently documented symptoms of mild dehydration, yet they are also among the symptoms people are least likely to attribute to water intake. The mechanism is direct. The brain sits inside a fluid-filled space, and the fluid that surrounds and cushions it, the cerebrospinal fluid, is affected by overall hydration status. Beyond the cushioning fluid, the brain tissue itself is approximately 75% water. Even a 2% decrease in overall body water content has been shown to produce measurable impairments in cognitive performance and is associated with increased headache frequency. When hydration improves, the tension headaches that many people treat with pain relievers several times a week simply stop occurring, not because of any pharmacological intervention, because the cause has been removed. By day 3, mental clarity also tends to begin shifting. This is one of the effects people consistently report but find hardest to believe is related to water, because the connection seems almost too straightforward. But the biochemistry is real. Neuronal communication in the brain depends on the movement of ions, sodium, potassium, calcium, and others, across cell membranes through water-based channels. When the fluid environment around neurons is even slightly depleted, signal transmission slows. The processing speed of neural circuits decreases. Focus narrows. Working memory becomes less efficient.
The particular quality of mental fog that dehydration produces has been described in research as a reduction in processing speed and an increase in perceived mental effort, meaning tasks that should feel routine begin to feel harder than they are. As hydration improves by day 3, this fog begins to lift, not because anything extraordinary has occurred, but because the brain is operating in the fluid environment it requires to function at its actual capacity. By days 4 and 5, the effects on energy are often the change that surprises people most. Fatigue is the single most commonly reported symptom of chronic mild dehydration in clinical research, yet it is almost never the first explanation people reach for when they feel persistently tired. The mechanisms behind dehydration-related fatigue are multiple. Reduced blood volume means less efficient oxygen delivery to muscles and organs. The slight increase in blood viscosity means the cardiovascular system is working harder for the same circulatory output, leaving less reserve energy available for other activities. Cellular metabolism, the process by which every cell converts nutrients into usable energy, is impaired when the fluid environment inside and outside the cell is not optimally maintained. Even the mitochondria, the structures inside cells responsible for producing ATP, the body's primary energy currency, require a well-hydrated cellular environment to operate at full capacity. When hydration improves consistently over several days, all of these mechanisms improve simultaneously. Blood volume increases slightly. Oxygen delivery becomes more efficient. Cellular metabolism runs more cleanly. The cardiovascular system does less unnecessary work. And the result, which people typically begin noticing around day 4 or 5, is an energy level that feels qualitatively different from what they are used to. Not the sharp, temporary energy spike of caffeine, a steadier, more sustained, more underlying sense of capability that persists through the day without the crashes and dips they had normalized.
The skin is telling a parallel story during this same window. Skin is the largest organ in the body, and it is composed of cells that require constant hydration to maintain their structure, elasticity, and barrier function. In a chronically dehydrated person, skin cells are slightly shrunken and less turgid than they are meant to be. The result is skin that appears duller, less plump, more prone to fine lines, and less resilient when pressed. The skin's barrier function, its ability to prevent moisture loss and protect against environmental irritants, is also compromised when hydration is inadequate. By days 4 and 5 of consistently increased water intake, skin cells are more fully hydrated. The skin begins to look visibly different. The dullness that many people attribute to their skin type or their age or their genetics begins to resolve into something with more luminosity, more evenness, more of the quality that expensive topical products promise but cannot fully deliver, because the hydration they apply to the surface cannot substitute for the hydration that must come from within. Day 6 brings continued deepening of all the changes already underway, but it also marks a point at which something important is happening in the joints and connective tissues. Cartilage, the smooth tissue that covers the ends of bones in joints and prevents bone-on-bone friction, is approximately 80% water. Synovial fluid, which fills the joint space and provides both lubrication and shock absorption, is produced and maintained based on the body's overall hydration status. In a chronically dehydrated person, cartilage is slightly more compressed and less cushioned than it should be. Joints may feel stiffer in the morning, more prone to discomfort during activity, and slower to recover after exertion. By day 6 of increased hydration, the fluid environment of the joints is measurably better supported. People with mild joint stiffness or discomfort often begin noticing improvement around this time, not because structural damage has been repaired, but because the biological environment the joints need to function comfortably is finally being adequately maintained.
The same principle applies to the spinal discs, the fluid-filled cushions between the vertebrae that absorb the compressive forces of daily movement and gravity. These discs lose water throughout the day, which is partly why people are measurably shorter in the evening than in the morning. During sleep, the discs rehydrate, but this overnight rehydration is more complete and more effective when overall body hydration is adequate. People who have lived with low-grade back discomfort or spinal stiffness sometimes find that consistent improved hydration produces a surprisingly meaningful improvement in how their back feels, particularly through the day as the discs face the compressive demands of upright posture and movement.
By day 7, something worth examining carefully is happening in the body's hormonal and metabolic regulation. Hydration status affects insulin sensitivity in ways that are not widely known but are clearly documented in the research. Even mild dehydration elevates a hormone called vasopressin, also known as antidiuretic hormone, which the body produces to conserve water. Chronically elevated vasopressin has been associated with increased insulin resistance and elevated blood glucose in population studies. When hydration is consistently adequate, vasopressin levels normalize, and the downstream effects on insulin function improve. For people managing blood sugar or metabolic health, consistent, adequate hydration is a lever that is rarely discussed but genuinely meaningful. The metabolism itself runs differently in a well-hydrated state. Lipolysis, the process by which the body breaks down stored fat for energy, requires water. Fat metabolism produces waste products that must be transported and excreted through water-based systems. Even the cellular machinery responsible for thermogenesis, the production of body heat as part of metabolic function, is affected by hydration. Studies have shown that drinking adequate cold water produces a temporary increase in metabolic rate, partly through the energy cost of warming the water to body temperature and partly through enhanced cellular metabolic activity. After 7 days of consistent increased hydration, the body's baseline metabolic efficiency is meaningfully improved compared to its chronically underhydrated state. At the end of 7 days, if you were to take stock of the full picture, what you would find is not one thing that has improved. You would find nearly everything operating closer to its designed capacity. The brain is clearer and faster. The energy is more consistent and reliable. The skin is visibly healthier. The joints are better cushioned. The gut is moving more efficiently. The kidneys are filtering more effectively. The cardiovascular system is doing its work with less effort. The hormones that regulate appetite, metabolism, and fluid balance are cycling more smoothly. The headaches that were a routine inconvenience are gone. The afternoon fatigue that seems structural is reduced or absent. The general heaviness and dullness that had become the background texture of daily life has lifted. None of this required a product. None of it required a pot of coddle. None of it required expertise, expense, or sacrifice of any kind. It required water, consistently, over 7 days, which means it also required something more fundamental than that. It required the decision to take seriously something that had been dismissed as too simple to matter. The body is an extraordinarily sophisticated system, but it is not a complicated one in its most basic needs. It needs sleep, it needs movement, it needs food that actually nourishes it, and it needs water in amounts that most people, on most days, simply do not provide. The gap between how most people feel and how their body is actually capable of making them feel is, in a significant number of cases, measured in glasses of water per day. Not in years of effort, not in difficult changes, in something that falls from the sky. 7 days is enough to feel the difference. And once you feel it, the question of whether water matters stops being a question at all.